Shabbat Shalom, Chavrei, Chag Sameach. I'm going to give a bit more of a message this week than a traditional sermon. I've been fighting off a stomach bug. I'm not sure where my reserves are. Of course, all that being said, this will probably end up being as long as a usual sermon But anyway, I was looking through the Torah reading for Shmini HaPesach, the 8th day of Passover. If you do not celebrate 2 days of Chag, or if you're in Israel, then you will not be reading this in shul tomorrow. But I got excited because it was about tithes of the Maaser. Right, rolling eyes out there. When we read about the tithe of the Maaser along with the Truma, these are the passages usually where rabbis stand up and talk about upping your membership dues, or maybe even a shul president might get into the act. But outside of Orthodox Judaism, I've very, very seldom heard a more subtle or detailed version of the responsibility of tithes being given. Yes, I know you're about ready to turn off the sermon right now. Listen, I don't have a physical congregation. I'm not asking for you to up your membership dues. But, all right, how many of you out there know that we don't just have one tithe, we actually have 3 that are talked about in the Torah? Aha! See, I got you. It's a little bit more subtle. We have the Maaser Rishon, the Maaser Sheni, and then we have the Trumat HaMaaser. That would have been in addition to your Truma. So the Truma is before you pay for anything else. You cut a certain amount of your income off the top, or your produce, actually, agricultural society, and give that to the Levites. That's for the sustenance, the sustaining of the temple system. This is oftentimes confused with the Maaser Rishon, which is actually meant for the poor, but it was also given to the Levites to then distribute to the poor. So you put those two together, and the analogies, I mean, if it wasn't a corrupt regime, and if you looked at the Tanakh, we had, according to the narrative, good regimes and corrupt regimes. If it wasn't a corrupt regime, this is analogous to a lot of how we understand the concept of taxes. Now, depending on which side of the political aisle you're on, the idea of, do I give my money of my own choice to which charities, or do I want the government to redistribute that money? Look, these sorts of debates have probably going on for a lot longer than we've been fighting about them on Twitter. There's also the Trumat HaMaaser, which would have been the pauper's tithe. So that was every 3 years. It was a certain amount of your produce that was to be given directly to the poor. And then we read today something completely different. We are reading from Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 14, starting in verse 22. Aser ta'aser, that's a way of saying you shall absolutely do something. You shall set aside every year, absolutely and surely set aside every year, a 10th part of all the yield of your sowing that is brought in from the field. Right, this should sound pretty familiar. This is pretty familiar fare about tithing. Don't worry, it changes. Continuing on to verse 23, you shall consume. You shall consume the tithes of your new grain and wine and oil and the firstlings of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Eternal, your God, in the place where the Eternal will choose to establish the ineffable name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God forever. That was a little unexpected, right? Wait a second, we get to do this? Oh no, hold on. Verse 24, and continuing, should the distance be too great for you, should you be unable to transport them, because the place where the Eternal, your God, has chosen to establish the ineffable name is far from you, and because the Eternal, your God, has blessed you, you may convert them to money. Wrap up the money and take it with you to the place where the Eternal, your God, has chosen, and spend the money on anything you want. Cattle, sheep, wine, or any other intoxicant. Bourbon's just fine, or anything you may desire, and you shall feast there in the presence of the Lord your God, and rejoice with your household. But don't neglect the Levite in your community, for he has no hereditary portion as you have. Those of you who know me know why I got so excited about this verse. All right, what's going on here? And why haven't I heard about this before? Why hasn't my rabbi been telling me about the Maaser Sheni? What's going on? And don't say that it's a buzzkill that it has to be done in front of the Eternal, your God, because if you're thinking of a bearded dude watching over your shoulder, that's Santa Claus, not God. So let's figure out what's absolutely happening here. First of all, before we get too terribly excited, this is incredibly clever economic marketing. Where is this to be done? You're supposed to do this in the presence of the eternal. What does that really mean? Well, where was the presence of the eternal according to our narrative is in Jerusalem. And of course, Jerusalem isn't mentioned. Why? Because this narrative is appearing wink, wink, wink before we were in Jerusalem, right? We were still wandering in the desert, or at the end of the 40 years of wandering. So Jerusalem can't be said specifically. This text was actually written by people who were kings and high priests in Jerusalem. Read my book for the details on that one. But it's brilliant. This is amazing, absolutely amazing marketing, because if you're going to come and just really just let it loose and enjoy yourself, bring your cash and bring your products to Jerusalem and bolster the economy. This is something that you'll see by governments, by wise companies, small businesses. This is actually why, as silly as it sounds, as much as there are many a comedian who likes to talk about the idea of a gift card, right? Famous Jerry Seinfeld episode right at the very beginning. Let's talk about the purpose of a gift card. You take money, which I can spend anywhere, and you convert it into something that I can only spend there. Yeah, but people get gift cards all the time because it feels like it's different and it's special, except for it's exactly what he says. Why? Because, well, the company wants you to spend it right there. By doing that, it supports the overall economy of the structure of leadership of society. Great. So let's get to interpretation then, because we can still choose to fulfill the Maaser Sheni in Jerusalem, and I think that would be a pretty cool thing to do. But we're not supporting a temple structure anymore, and so we get to look at this a little bit symbolically. We get to look at this a little bit metaphorically. And here's what I want you to think about. This is talking about the fruits of your labor, and look at all the things that are listed. You know, your herds, your crops, wine, oil. I mean, this is mentioning every aspect of a diverse economy at the time that they could possibly put in there that would still be socially appropriate, and saying that whatever it is you do, take the product, take what you produce, and enjoy it yourself. Now, most people listening to this work in some way. And work is work, whether we are doing it for a lot of money, whether we are volunteering, whether we are a stay-at-home parent, this is work. And our products are different. If the product is putting our time into making darn sure that those children get out to the world prepared as much as possible, that is work, and look at how amazing that product is. If we are in our office cubicle jobs because the stay-at-home orders are mostly all over, that is their own thing. But I think what the text is getting at here is something that we don't think about very often, which is exactly the point. How many of you, be honest, have gone through a month, or 6 months, or a year, or 5 years of your life, and at the end of a specific period of time, you look back and say, I don't remember anything that happened. It was a blur, right? One day blends into the next. Everything is pretty much unchanged. We have words for it, working for the man, the daily grind. We end up in a haze. We end up not aware of our present. Well, we're doing what we need to do. We need to put food on the table. We need to make sure that the lights are kept on. But we forgot about someone. We forgot about the person who is in that trance. That's actually what I like to call this. I like to call this the daily existence and subsistence trance. We have to do this. This is necessary. You can't get around it. Daily existence becomes a type of non-existence, and that's the exact point of this. You see, we do have to pay others. We do have taxes that we need to pay, and hopefully our various societies we're living in are just enough that those taxes are going to things that they should be going to. I'm not having that debate in this sermon. And hopefully, we're also in some sort of dialogue with how we give, if we are capable of doing so, to people who are less fortunate than us. So that's our Maaser Rishon, and that is our Trumat Maaser. But how many of us deliberately pay ourselves? Yeah, but what's this? I have to do it in the presence of the Eternal. Well, that's really what the secret of this is all about. And the second you think of the Eternal as a bearded dude who's looking over your shoulder to see if you're naughty or nice, and you combine that with the idea of good wine or any other intoxicant you please, then it gets really confusing really quickly, because we've got a messed up sense of God and a messed up sense of morality. Not to mention a messed up sense of pleasure. The inherent acknowledgement of the Maaser Sheni is that even though by definition, if we're existing, then we're existing, that somehow when we exist solely within that place where we're in a trance moving from day to day in order to survive, we're not actually really existing anymore. And so in order to exist again, remember, The ineffable name of God is Yud He Vav He. It's a variation of the verb to be. The very name of God means existence. Do you think that if we are to exist in that parallel, if we were to look at our existence in this trance where we don't remember anything and say that is a part of the elevatedness of the existence of the universe, what we find is that we fall way short. And in order to be able to be in that dialogue doesn't happen necessarily through that everyday trance. Now, that being said, Judaism contains everything that it takes in order to do that. There's a reason that we say 100 blessings a day traditionally, and it's not so that someone's looking over your shoulder saying, are you fulfilling the commandments of today? It's so that we slow down. If we have to fulfill 100 commandments a day, we are taking moments aside to meditate and to pray, which is absolutely necessary to break the trance. We are, as the first blossoms are coming outside here to northern Germany, taking a moment to breathe deep in the moment, to say a blessing and to remember. And the first time I see that blossom and I smell from it to say Shechianu, to recognize that moment at first. And then guess what? I've already broken that monotony of existence. And if I'm doing that every day, then I don't need this. But we don't do it. And if you don't believe me, how many of you were nodding along when I said, when's the last time you went by a month and didn't remember anything that happened in that month? Torah, our tradition, acknowledges that even with the best intentions, we all fall into this. And how do we break out of it? Pay ourselves first. But don't just do it. We can't just eat, drink, and be merry and have that be a part of the trance, because in that month that went by, how many happy hours were included in it? Or at least before Corona time, right? It's not enough to just eat, drink, and be merry. You have to do it with the same intentionality as stepping into a prayer. And that's what this is about. It's not just setting aside and being intoxicated. It's actually setting aside the time and space for me to be able to breathe deeply enough to be aware of my own existence again as part of a reflection of the existence of the eternal. And if we have not stopped that train of everyday trance, then we have not given of this tithe. And if you answered yes to when was the last time that you experienced this, this is for you. And if you're listening to this in the background and you're saying, and it's passing by and you're not going to remember the sermon in 5 minutes, this is for you. Listen to this. Because if you are living an existence that is a non-existence from the perspective of the universe, of eternity, then we are going downhill pretty quickly. That leads to a place where we do not have enough strength to continue even that trance eventually. Literally, we will get sick. Literally, we will start falling apart. Literally, most of us in this room, and most of you out there have probably experienced that. Our Torah has amazing wisdom in it. And sometimes the advice to eat, drink, and be merry can also be pretty radically spiritual, holy, and religious advice. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chag Sameach. We'll see you next time. Ohev et amo Yisrael